Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to any of our public that's joining us. And hope everybody is staying cool. So I will call our meeting to order at 10:31. And we have opening prayer. Trustee Tugwood will lead us in prayer.
Thank you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you for the gift of Catholic education. We thank you for everyone gathered here today. We thank you that you know each of us by name and have caused us to walk with you. You have entrusted us as stewards of your creation. Open our minds so that may we receive your eternal wisdom. Open our spirits so that we may know your leading and guidance. Open our hearts so that we may receive your wonderful love. Today, as we make decisions, help us to listen before speaking, to appreciate and value each other, our students, our staff, and our families. Fill our conversation with your grace and truth. May your light enfold us, may your spirit guide us, may your grace abound in us. We ask this for your glory and praise. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Trustee Tugwood. Our Treaty 6 land acknowledgement. We are a party to Treaty 6, and as such, we wish to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous people. We recognize the diversity of First Nations who have at one time lived across the territory, as well as the presence of the Métis Nation. Okay, we do not have a public forum. Approval of the agenda. Are there any additions? Trustee Tugwood?
Yes, I have an addition to the action items.
Okay.
And it would be due to virtual board meetings, committee meetings, ASBA, ACSTA, CCSTA, Archbishop Parish, COSCA, special meetings and World Caucus meetings during the 2021 school year. The trustee technical communication allowance paid as per policy 7, appendix B shall be retroactively paid from August 2020 to June 2021. So that would be my addition.
Okay, so
Can we put that maybe as 4.5?
Are you able to send that out to?
we can put it at 4.10. That's usually how we add action items.
Okay.
Or add items is at the end of a section.
I don't have it typed out.
Charlie?
Madam Chair, I'm wondering if it's related in one way to 4.4, if it would maybe go under that.
Yeah,
That is the retro.
Yeah,
No,
under that appendix.
A new 4.5, perhaps. They're
Yeah,
kind of
it could go. Yeah, it could go under there because they are related.
That's what I thought, 4.5.
Okay, we'll put it under 4.5, and then everything will move down.
Okay.
What's the dates there again? August.
Well, it would be the 2021 year, which begins in August through to June.
The fiscal year is September 1st to August 31st.
Oh, okay.
That's the fiscal year and the school year.
Okay. I was just thinking because we have meetings in August. That's why I put August.
Yeah, those are always the previous year, yeah. So our audited financials are always at August 31st of the school year.
To the fiscal year, September 2020 to June 2021. Well, I guess it would be to August. Well, no, because that might be changed by then.
Yeah. So the wording, do you want to send it to Ed for him to?
I don't have it typed up, but I guess I could type it up.
It could be dictated at that time as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll come back to it we have it in there as 4.5.
And I think Liz was going to bring something up about I'm not sure if it was one of her schools. I think
That's
she had
been
talked-
taken care of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, between Ed and her. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and I have an addition related to school fees. So I can put that 7.12. And any other additions? Deletions, we'll go to the committee reports under item number 5. And is there an audit report? Not at this time, I don't think. Finance, is there a finance? Oh, sorry, Ed?
Madam Chair, with regards to the audit committee, if we could establish a meeting for the audit committee in the new year, either at an August date or a September date, so that the auditor can meet with the committee prior to commencement of audit work,
Okay, so we'll leave that on then.
if we
You
could,
decide.
please.
Yeah, okay. 5.2, is there a finance meeting or finance report? Trustee Tugwood? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, no,
Okay.
Ed'll be presenting.
5.3, is there a labor report, Henry?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, we'll leave that one on. There's no student review, strike 5.4. 5.5. Is
That's
there a
the-
report from the meeting?
That was the teacher board advisory meeting, and
Yeah.
Lori typed up the minutes, and the minutes were sent out, which were excellent. Thank you, Lori. So I'm not sure if we really need to have a report because everyone's read the minutes.
Okay, is there any action out of that committee then at this time? No? Okay. 5.6, Trustee Sirwa is not here yet, but anybody else on long range planning, is there anything to report for long range planning?
I don't believe so.
Okay. 5.7, policy. Is there a report from policy at all?
I can talk to that. Yeah.
Okay. And ASB, is there ECSTA?
No, we have an emergency meeting this afternoon, later this evening, so.
Okay,
there's
so nothing. Okay, and I will take off 5.10. There's really nothing to report there. It's ongoing and there will be a draft soon, so. Okay, so if somebody could pass the agenda that the board approved the agenda as amended. Could I get a motion, please? Trustee Tugwood?
I'll make a motion that the board approve the agenda as amended.
Okay, all those in favor?
All right,
I
Okay, and that is carried unanimously. 2.1, approval of the minutes. Are there any changes? Comments? If nothing, could I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
Madam Chair, yeah, that the board approved the minutes of the regular meeting held May 19th, 2021, as circulated.
Okay, all those in favor?
I
Okay, and that is carried unanimously. And our board priorities are there. Okay, so we're on to, thank you, Ed, 4.1,
one. Yep.
and Trustee Spitich.
Yeah, so.
Do you want to
the-
present this action item?
Yeah, so the role of the board chair, we had discussed, so normally the board would delegate the chair to represent us, and we wanted to add some latitude to that. So on point 10, we had added that the board would give our board chair that would be our chief spokesperson unless they felt that the superintendent or another group should speak for us, I believe is what, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what we wanted to do there, give some latitude to the board chair to delegate to the superintendent or another group wherever it would be appropriate for that individual to address whatever the issue is. So that's just a minor change there. So we were going to do first, second, and third reading. Any comments on that? Yeah. If not, then I would propose that the board give policy 5, role of the board chair first, second, and third reading, and that the revised policy now be in effect for the division.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions about that? It is unusual for us to do 3 readings in one motion, but it is a minor change. So,
And it is also end of the year, so that
Yeah.
factors in as well. We're not going to have another policy meeting, so
We will have another board meeting though in August.
we will. Yeah.
That will
yeah,
be-
well, there is opportunity for committee meetings in August and September and October, really, still, because we will not be. We're the same organization until, our committee organization, it remains the same until after the election.
Right.
I see this as a very minor change though, and I don't see a problem with it going through all 3 readings myself.
Okay. Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, and that is carried unanimously. So 4.2.
Yeah, so board operations, policy 7. So we had discussed communications allowance as those are rapidly changing, especially with this COVID that we're dealing with. So 13.4.1, we had added in there in recognition of technology and communication needs, a monthly communication allowance shall be made available to all trustees. The rate of the allowance shall be established at least annually by the board, and that rate is established in the next policy as we will bring that up. And then as well, in addition to that, 13.5 for travel allowance, we had added that trustees will submit their allowance monthly as a part of their expense claim. Any comments on that?
Okay, so I do have a few questions. Just the rationale for the communication allowance, and then I kind of see a conflict that there is, like, does the board chair apply for both? Is it an optional allowance? So, I'm just opening up for some discussion right now. But the questions that I have,
We
Do
had
you
just
trust-
set it as a flat rate, and then if we look at the next policy, we had just set it as a flat rate, as you'll see. But
okay, so do trustees have to demonstrate that their costs have increased? So,
No, I
Like-
don't think so. I think it's just a flat, because it's in recognition that this is the reality of this life we live right now. And it has been actually for several years, that we need the mobile communication, that we need the internet. You have to have it in order to be a trustee.
so yeah, I'm just wondering if
You don't have to have it to be a trustee.
Actually, you do, Henry. How would you get emails if you did not have internet? Really? You have
Well,
to.
Okay, so I'll just go around for each trustee to speak individually. So trustee Afon, did you have a comment?
So the rationale was, again, due to some changes that have come since COVID and things that have been happening, and a lot of the meetings occurring. So the bottom line is that setting costs, especially in the communication as well as internet use, have increased in certain areas based on whatever package a trust was on. And then again, we all do know with the pandemic came a lot of Zoom meetings and other meetings. So then that is the base or the rationale for this coming in. But to your question asking, would that be optional? If you look at it, if the chair already have a communication allowance, there's no reason why this will be a conflict of for a chair to be assessing this as well. So then this is to the rest of the trustees. Okay, but again, how do we demonstrate where the costs have increased? That I have spoken about that, and that will be where we really be unable, because how many phone calls and how many of the internet use can you really track or differentiate from your own personal as well as board work? So a flat rate, like Chia was saying, it's where we need to be putting our discussions as to what would be the appropriate number or appropriate rate to apply in that scheme of making it a flat rate. So that's all I can add on to that. And again, with the change in the bottom there to submit monthly, that was an error that we all have. And then we want that to be submitted to be clearly that, yeah, it will become a pay as you go or pay as you received when you have come to the board office on that monthly basis. Thank you.
I'd like to add something as well that I was just thinking of. So some of the other things so trustees are provided a laptop for their communications. But a lot of the time, I'm not sure about everyone else, but a lot of the time I'm using other mediums, devices and whatnot to, read emails, reply, send things, not necessarily using my laptop. So those are things that I just happen to have already, but they're not supplied by the division. And then there's other things that they don't fall right under tech communications, but like printers, printer ink, paper, just all the other little things that we use, that they all have a cost associated to the trustees. So those are just some of the things that I just thought of as Henry was speaking to that. I don't know if those should be considered or not, but that's my input anyway.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Tugwood?
As far as the technical fees that the chair gets versus the trustees, I think this amount that we would be for the trustees, and you would continue to get the same amount as the chair. That's kind of what I'm thinking. As far as the communication using your cell phone and your laptop and your other devices, I agree with Dan. I actually upgraded because of doing so many meetings. I bought myself a bigger Mac for my desktop as well as my laptops. I also use the printer quite a bit, and I think that is part of it. And I have been using data, not just this year, but lots before that. I once did a whole day meeting from a bus where I used my cellular data. And I know Sandra did one from a beach where she used her cellular
that's true.
for the whole day. So we use our cellular data a lot. And as far as sometimes if you're away from home and you're getting emails, I'm using cellular data, and again, our text and a few other things. And also, we use the internet. You do have to have the internet. Emails come out every day. You're reading an email, usually from Charlie about COVID right now, but there's lots of other things that come out on a daily basis to look at. And that's not just the board, that's the ASBA things and ACSDA things and the Rural Caucus things and the daily information from Caitlin as far as things that pertain to our board that we need to be aware of, and also social media that we need to keep. This is how I keep up with what's happening in my community and how people are feeling, especially right now with the things about the name change and so on. It's really important to be tuned into your school's website and to social media to see how people are feeling. So I really think that this is very important, and perhaps it should have been but before, but to start now, I think it's a good thing. So yes, I am definitely in favor of the trustee tech communication allowance. It says here that it's set to 40 per month. I think it should be 50 per month. I myself, I pay about $180 a month for internet and the phone. Maybe if you guys get it a lot cheaper, you can tell me who you get it from. I can go with them. But that's kind of, so I know it's hard to say how much time you use, but if we're going to be logging time, that's so complicated.
No one's going to know.
I agree on the flat rate. It just seems, and I looked into other boards. Some of them do a flat rate. In fact, quite a few. One, I think Black Gold was $75 a month. There was another one that was $1,800 a year, which is high, but they're also counting in the printer and your ink and your paper and all that stuff too. So anyways, that's my thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Tegwood. So the what I'm concerned about is, so the communication allowance for the chair was set up in my first term as a trustee, and that communication allowance was set up, and you had to demonstrate that you did incur those costs. So that's how it was set up. So typically, long distance calls were usually what were which had to be tracked, and then that the chair would get reimbursed for that. But the way that the wording is in the policy is that it sounds like the chair and can claim the $50 and the $40. So it's just like, I don't think the wording is clear enough there. And then as well, for myself, my costs have not increased since I've been a trustee for this second term. So my cost for internet or my cost for my cell phone has not changed. So it doesn't matter how much I use it. There's no extra charges. So for trustees who have not incurred extra charges or do not see that there's extra charges, like perhaps it could be an optional claim. But I see that they have, like what the policy is suggesting is that the trustee claim it each month on their expense claim. Is that correct? So it could be optional, but could it be worded in the policy as that?
Okay. So we would have to claim it every time if we wanted to. It wouldn't just automatically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because and then the other point is, like, there could be trustees that are already, they do have, they're collecting an allowance already from their work or perhaps another organization. So
Right.
I think there has to be some wording in there that perhaps a trustee will not make this claim if receiving a similar allowance from another organization.
That's, you know what, that's actually a really good point, Michelle. Like, I'm just thinking about right now, like, for example, like per diems, for example, like I haven't claimed those all year, but that's my option, right? I have that option. It doesn't automatically, I don't automatically, because I went to that meeting, get the per diem. So yeah, that's actually, that's a very valid point.
So could this be, like, I think it's, we can't pass it in, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
readings.
Yeah.
I think it's got to go back to policy for a couple of tweaks.
Yeah, you're right. Good. That's a good point. Yeah.
So do you, I guess what I could suggest is that, do you want to suggest a different motion, or do you want to just take it back to policy?
It might need a little more work because, as you said, there's almost like 2 policies right now, right? One for the board chair and then one for the trustees. So maybe we should look at amalgamating those 2, make them optional.
Maybe it's just one, one
Yeah.
allowance and get
Yeah.
rid of the board chair
Yeah.
allowance.
Yeah, I think that's what we should discuss.
And then have some wording in there about, not receiving, a duplicate claim.
Yeah.
From another organization.
Right.
So those are just my
Yeah,
recommendations.
Yeah, those are all very good points. Thanks, Michelle.
Those are good points. I agree with that.
Okay.
I hadn't thought about getting it from some other organization.
No, neither did I. You're right.
But it's almost like the medical thing where if you already get it from another organization, you don't claim on your medical. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So did you want to just go
Madam Chair,
ahead, Trustee Afan?
Yeah, I would suggest we do one reading and then take it back and
Mhm.
bring back.
Okay.
Mhm.
So Trustee Spidich, you want to amend the motion for
Okay,
to be
so
one reading?
So
First
policy 7 board operations, that the board give policy 7 board operations first reading, and that the revised policy, I guess I can't say that now, can I?
No.
So
First
I'll
reading.
just say that the board gives
First reading in principle.
in principle. Okay.
Madam Chair, can we actually do that? We haven't put in language. So how can we give first reading?
Yeah.
Like we would have to put in proposed language speaking to what you've suggested before that first reading. Otherwise, it's not a first reading.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
it
then
would
let's
have
just
to
vote
be-
on it
It would have to be in principle. That's all that I'm suggesting, but perhaps there's too much change to,
And Ed, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if you can make a first reading just on a suggestion like that in principle.
We can make first reading and bring back the amendment version in the second and the third. That's why it's just going to be only first to bring it back for the second and third.
But
And-
first reading, if it passes first reading, is my understanding is you're approving what the wording is as is.
okay, so
No, we
we'll
can
just
all-
get Ed to give the comments. Is there too much change for policy to make a
There, I guess
motion
my
in principle?
Yeah, I guess my thought is that you want to look at eliminating one of the clauses. So if we're not doing the edits here in terms of the first reading as is and other considerations, then I would say that no, there is no motion to be made, and it goes back to policy for prepare a proposal back to the board with those comments considering.
Okay.
Okay, so it'll go back to policy.
Altogether.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Okay, so 4.3.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
The trustee honoraria expense. So we had discussed the travel time. It was previously on a yearly allowance, so we have changed that to a monthly allowance based on, it looks like that's divided by about 11, so 11 months. So we basically just kind of prorated it on a monthly basis. And then of course, 0.7, that's where we had established the the check allowance to $40 a month, which we will now
So
have to
Yeah.
revise.
So
So this one as well will have to go back.
yeah, I think we have to
take it back.
yeah, take it back, and it'll come back with when the policy is revised.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but everybody has seen it for now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, those are really good points, Michelle. Thank you for bringing those up. We didn't think of that.
Okay, so 4.4. So this is actually my motion that I'm bringing forward. We have had discussion on this before, and I'm just bringing it to the board's attention that we should address it. It needs to be addressed. So in light of the virtual meetings this school year, I am recommending that the taxable travel allowance be retroactively prorated for this for this current school year. So it is extremely important to demonstrate transparency and integrity to our public. This school year, we have only met 3 times in person, and that is exactly what the travel allowance is for. It's for travel time for those trustees that are traveling from outside the wards to Leduc for a board meeting. So this allowance was an automatic payment, and it was set up prior to virtual meetings. And we really had no idea that we were going to be in this kind of situation. So it was really an unknown. But since there was no travel time for virtual board meetings from December onward, this allowance really needs to be adjusted as indicated in the motion. So I'll just open up for discussion on any comments or thoughts.
Sorry, I don't quite understand. So it's going to be taken away from?
Yeah, adjusted, prorated and adjusted. So we had 3 meetings in person. So it would just be adjusted from December onward. And we could possibly be meeting in August in person.
So what happens for those who claimed for more than that then? What happens then?
They didn't claim, Dan.
Oh, they didn't? Oh, okay.
So
It was
Trustee
an automatic-
Tugwood,
It was
so
not-
I'll just ask if everybody can just speak individually. So Dan, it was an automatic payment. And it was an oversight in the situation that we're in right now.
Okay.
We had no idea. Like even when we went virtually in December, we didn't know how long it was going to be for. And we just went month to month. And it was it was just a situation that we just were not aware of how it was going to turn out. So anyhow, now that we look at it, we should adjust it because it really, nobody traveled, right? So they were virtual meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have another comment about it, Trustee Svidich?
I think I understand it.
Okay. Trustee Tugwood, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say it was kind of just on your expense thing, or you just got it and you didn't even think about it until I realized this isn't right. We shouldn't be getting this, and which is why I brought it up at the meeting. And so, yeah, it needed to stop. And I like the idea of just applying for it on your expensing when you do it. I did not realize until I read that this is just for board meetings, that it's not for the other things that are part of the honorarium that you drive to Leduc for.
Yeah.
So those things like the Archbishop's parish dinner and special meetings and all those things are just, your travel time is kind of on your own time, right?
Right.
It's just for the one board meeting a month.
Yeah.
And this was put in place probably before you were on, or I don't know. Like, I don't know what kind of a formula they used or if they used a formula, but I agree with applying for it like this. That's fine.
Yeah, the revision will be much better suited to virtual and in person. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, and hopefully it will go back to being in person.
Yeah.
Because I miss it.
Yeah, we're tired of flat people.
I'm tired of Zoom meetings, to tell you the truth. But anyways, I think that's a great idea as far as, and I was not in favor of retroactively. I would have liked to have seen that just because it's awkward to go back, that it would have been nice and clean to just start it in September. But if you want to go back, I'm fine with that. And then also the retroactive other thing will probably equal things out, and probably is a bit fairer way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Tuckwood. Trustee Afon, did you have a comment?
I have a comment, Madam Chair. So, this was an honest mistake that was, and again, that's why we have policies to guide us and policy changes here and there to reflect times. I believe Trustee Tagwood have touched on that. I'm not in favor. Now we are addressing this in policy to reflect going forward as is. That honest mistake, like you said, should we go back once and then get, COVID was a new, different era that we all entered into. So I'm not in favor of prorating that back, as you were saying. We have a policy that we are discussing again, and you've heard some of the comments as to some of the incurred costs that have come with online or virtual meetings and its cost. I believe if we address this in policy going forward, same like it is being addressed already with previous trustees before we now came on to find these because of COVID that have exposed some of these. I'll be fair that we leave it as is, address it in policy, and then moving forward, we have policy to guide when we are not meeting virtually, when we are meeting virtually and in person. So then we do those claims to reflect as is in policy. It will be, again, another nightmare if we do go that route for admin, especially finance department, to go back and do all of these work again when we can equate some of this again, as I'm saying, with what other cost that is being incurred in data and all of that, because in the end, it will come to balance itself. And our public really know this was a different situation, and we've realized this because of the exposure that was shined on it based on the COVID situation. We will address it. They know we are doing what we can to hold ourselves accountable. And especially when we realize an honest mistake, we've taken steps to address it. So I will leave it as such. Thank you.
Trustee Spinach, did you have a comment?
I did. So just so I understand this, so we're talking, this is the travel time allowance we're talking about, right?
Yes,
Is that what
yes.
this is referring to? Okay, and that was automatically
Paid each month.
processed, right?
Yes.
But then you had also said it was only done for the first 3 meetings that we had.
No, what I was saying is that we only had 3 in-person meetings for this school year. So those are legitimate.
Oh, okay.
Like, so you
yes,
did travel,
yes, okay, I
did-
understand. Yeah,
you
I
were
understand.
compensated, but it's from
understand.
December onward that
It was still,
trustees have been overpaid
right,
for
I got
that
it.
travel
Okay.
allowance.
Gotcha.
So-
yeah,
So
So-
we have an opportunity to make it right, to rectify, that payment. And
There's a problem.
oop, sorry.
so this is our opportunity. There's a motion here. It demonstrates transparency and integrity to our public that we are writing something that has been, just an oversight. It was an honest mistake for sure, but this is our opportunity to correct it. And I would encourage us that we do the right thing, and we're fair to our public, and we do the right thing to retroactively adjust that. So, and it would be from December onward, probably till now.
Right. Okay. Well, then in that case, I don't have any opinion either way, because I didn't put any claims in, so it doesn't matter to me what we decide here.
Yeah, no, Dan, you would have been automatically paid that. It would have been
Oh.
added onto your honoraria.
Oh, right.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
So,
Trustee-
There's three.
okay,
Yeah.
one trustee at a time.
Sorry,
So,
I'm done. I'm done. Sorry.
okay, thank you, Trustee Efron.
So, Madam Chair, like I've alluded to, we have another policy that will be coming. Would you then say you'll be in favor retroactive to that same cost that was incurred when we went virtually?
Right. So if we are, adjusting retroactively, then it makes sense that, trustees have that option, to present their rationale for retroactive for the communication and tech allowance.
Okay.
Like the rationale for both, absolutely, can come forward. Yep. So are there any other comments or questions? Okay, so I will go forward with that motion. So due to virtual board meetings during the 2020-21 school year, trustee travel per diem paid as per Policy 7 Appendix B shall be retroactively prorated for in-person meetings for the 2020-21 school year. Okay, I'll just ask for a roll call. So, Trustee Efron, in favor or
Not in
opposed?
favor, opposed.
Sorry. Well, say that again.
Trustee Efron, opposed?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, Trustee Tugwood?
Opposed.
Okay, Trustee Spitich?
I would go with the will of the board, which is opposed.
Okay, and I'm in favor, so the motion is defeated.
And do you want that recorded?
Yeah, I asked for it to be recorded.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so 4.5.
So
So we'll
sorry.
go ahead, Trustee Tugwood.
4.5 was to make retroactive the trustee tech communication allowance. And I also, because now that this has changed, that it was opposed as far as retroactive, then I would withdraw this motion.
Okay, the motion is withdrawn. Thank you. Okay, 4.5, board meeting and event dates. And Charlie, you are going to present dates for August and October. Since we do not have our organizational meeting, in June, the way that we usually do, since it is an election year, we do need some dates going forward for August, September, and October. And then at the trustee orientation, sorry, October 25th, there will be an organizational meeting and one meeting scheduled shortly after that. So trustees, any comments or considerations about these dates? We did have a start time for the trustee orientation at 1 o'clock. That way, if we did kind of go into the later afternoon and there's lots of questions by new trustees, new board, then that gives us some leeway, to in the afternoon rather than ending it at noon for a half a day. Trustee Efron?
Yeah, I just have a quick wordsmithing. Due to the 21 board meeting and the board not, do we want to make that it doesn't read well when I was reading through it? Due to 2021 being an election year and the board not the board will not be approving. The board will not be approving the 2021 board meeting schedule until its organizational meeting. The board would need to choose board meeting dates until such time. So I'm thinking we should add where it says the board will not be approving.
Madam Chair? if I
Yeah.
could, that's just background information. The motion's at the bottom, so I don't think we need to wordsmith the
We need
background.
to Westsmith, okay.
Yeah, that's just background. So thank you, Charlie. So the motion's at the bottom there. So these are the proposed dates. They're very similar to what the regular calendar would be, but we just had to incorporate the trustee orientation and the organizational meeting. So is there somebody who would like to make this motion?
So then I'm making the motion then.
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead, trustee Tugwood.
My question is about the trustee orientation. Is that going to be just for the new trustees? Is that just for all of us to introduce us to the new trustees?
I believe our discussion was, it was recommended that we all attend the trustee orientation,
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
new and
I know.
returning. Yeah. Okay, so trustee F1 has made that motion.
That the board approve the proposed meeting event date as presented. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor?
I
Okay, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, 4.6, these are educational plan and AERR planning timelines and processes. Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are in year 3 of the division's 4-year process. So the new education plan is now a term plan, I remind you, for 4 years. So with this being year 3, there is no community consultation. I'll point out. Also of note in this document is some tweaking to the fact that there are no PATs or diploma exams. So that is something that's been removed from this document. So there will be no data on that. And also a reminder that the board is provided with survey data, both for the AERR and the division survey as part of the annual education results report at the November meeting. So that those are kind of the big changes in the plan. Otherwise, it's pretty much what has been presented and approved by the board in the past. So I'll entertain any questions if there's any.
Any questions, comments? Is this a better schedule, you know, now that we're actually moving into the correct schedule? Because last year we were still doing like kind of a blended, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah,
this
in
is a better
November,
layout.
in November, we approved the education plan and the results report. So now we're on the proper cycle.
Right, right. Okay, can somebody go forward with that motion? That's there, 4.6.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, trustee Afan.
That the board approve the 2021-22 education plan AERR planning timelines and processes as presented. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and that's carried unanimously. 4.7, Lori?
Yes, so I'm bringing forward locally developed courses that we would like to get approved for the school division. Alberta Education every year, or Alberta Education allows for the development or acquisition of locally developed courses, which are outside of the provincial curriculum. And so we have asked to acquire a number of courses from other divisions, and you will see the list there in the backgrounder. So that's essentially the information. If there's any questions, please go ahead.
Any comments or questions from anyone?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Sure, go ahead, trustee Afan.
Laurie, is there a reason why I see some with just 1 year extension? There's a couple of the locally developed courses.
Yeah, it's up to the board and they expire after a certain amount of time. They have to be reviewed. So if a course, let's say a course was only approved until August 31st of 2022, for example, then it can only be renewed for another year. And then there has to be a review of the course. So this is a continuous process year after year that we have to go through.
Yeah, I do understand that. So is it possible then, I see the one from Wild Rose, I have a 1 year, that's the film appreciation, it's 1 year. Is it possible we do it 3 years or whatever to align with the rest? And then there's that one, the musical theater, again from Catholic, from Calgary Catholic is 1 year. And those are the
Trustee Eflon, I think Charlie has a comment. He can maybe help with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So those timelines are not set by Star
Yeah.
Catholic. They are either a timeline imposed by the lending board or
Oh, but-
Alberta Education.
oh, okay.
So we don't have any flexibility in those timelines.
In those, oh, okay. Thank you. That makes sense. I was like,
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you,
okay.
Charlie. I wasn't clear.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. They're all very interesting and it's nice to be able to offer those to our students. Thank you for that, preparing all that, Lori. Is there somebody who would be willing to make this motion, 4.7? Trustee Tugwood?
I can make that motion.
Sorry, I guess it's 4.7.
4.7, that the board approve the 2021-2022 education plan.
No, sorry, the
Not 4.7,
numbering changed, so I guess it would be 4.8, yeah.
4.8, that the board authorize an extension to the locally developed courses as presented and the resources required to teach them for the time prescribed in the background report.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Tugwood. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and that's carried unanimously. Okay, 4.8. 2021, 2022 budget. I don't know why all those twos are so hard to pronounce. Okay, go ahead, Edward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to the 21-22 budget, the Finance Committee reviewed the detail budget report, which is attached to the board's agenda. What I'd like to do is go review it in a kind of higher level through a PowerPoint presentation, and then deal with some of the particulars, especially with regards to the assumptions and risks that are presented in the budget report itself. So if I may, I'm going to start my PowerPoint and hopefully we are good to go for with that. And everybody should see a slide that says budget 2021-2022.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. There we go. Again, basically, when I do presentation, I like to provide some context, review our assumptions, give the board some details with regards to the traditional blocks that school budgets are based within, instruction, transportation, operations and maintenance, as well as system administration and governance. And then the last one is because of particular sensitivity in terms of our unspent funds, both at the political level as well as our own circumstances with regards to being able to meet unforeseen circumstances. So talk a little bit about that. So our context, of course, we have the board's policy. We have administrative procedure that directs our budget development processes. We have the guiding principles outlined by the board as administration starts the budgeting processes back in January and February. Then we also have a context of our current environment. What's our environmental changes between the years or as they evolve? With regard to board policy, under the board's policy 2, you have fiscal accountability. So you have the right to determine the basis for resource allocations, approve the budget annually, ensure resources are allocated to achieve desired results, make budget adjustments when necessary, approve allocations of one-time exceptional funding, and approve annually the schedule of fees, including curricular, transportation, international student tuition, and non-resident fees. In terms of administrative procedure, our context is derived from AP 500, which says that we request input from the board, school councils, administrators, and staff when developing our budget. That the budget is reflective of our provincial funding framework, and that the spending authority and responsibility for expenditures is delegated to the school, subject to division procedures, and in some cases, the departments when we're talking operations and maintenance. So decisions are intended to be made locally to address local needs. Now, when we look at our environment, we've had an interesting past year. We have the pandemic response and responses, and I think we are still responding to that moving forward. Our context is that our funding is based on projections, but they're adjusted for actuals, but that impacts the following year. But for 2021-22, because of the exceptional circumstance surrounding our operations, the province had us held harmless in terms of our funding for 21-22. There was no adjustment, even though we realized a lower enrollment than we had projected or even had historically. We had an ATA collective agreement that expired back in August of 2020. So that remains an outstanding. And again, when we go through the budget report, it's reflected in some of the risks and assumptions that we base our budget on. For 2020-21, we had the operation of the online school. Looking forward, we've issued a survey to see how parents are feeling about returning to in-person classes and determining a need for the online school to continue. We have the implementation of the coming forward. We have implementation of the Transportation Task Force recommendations over the next 2 years. That responsibility for furthering that report is to a Transportation Audit Committee that the province is to form and consult. So it'll be interesting how that evolves moving forward, but that is part of our context. And then we also have the new curriculum implementation as part of our environmental. So we've got a lot of things that are quite nebulous in terms of how they're going to react. This budget assumes a lot of status quo until those things become known. So this budget assumes the resumption of traditional operations for the fall, where we've got some uncertainties with regards to staffing increases. We've assumed 0 increases when they're unknown. But our enrollment projections assume about a 7% increase overall. That places us approximately the same level that we were projecting to be at for this year. So kind of our projections are static, but it's an increase over our current enrollments. With regards to risks, we have some, we have some uncertainty with regard to the post-pandemic operations, if we're truly entering a post-pandemic world. The determination of a need for the online school program is still to be made. That's a risk to us because we've assumed resumption of traditional operations. Our enrollment estimates are higher than actual for a second year. And again, this year, for next year, we've been held harmless against any adjustment. I don't know if that will happen if our enrollment projections are not met for next year. So there's a risk to that. And again, the collective bargaining, if there's any increases in costs that are eventually made once the collective bargaining is wrapped up, because there is so much uncertainty around that at this point in time, our only collective agreement is with the ATA. We've assumed 0, but then eventually whatever final outcomes will be, we'll have to deal with that. Looking at some detail with regard to enrollment and headcount, Total enrollment is projected to be at 4,526 students, which is, as I've indicated, 7% increase. Our ECS enrollment, and again, this current year was at a lower level, and that's why I provided kind of a historical chart from past years, especially on the earlier grades, that were our ECS enrollment is to increase by 11%, and that's the context from this year moving to next year's projection. Our estimates are based on our historical enrollments, as well as transitioning between grades as they move between schools. We worked very hard with our administrators in developing those projections. They're done very early on. The province requested projections in early January in order to determine our funding levels. And we've used that same information moving forward in the whole budgeting process. My information is that budget projection process will always be done that early on. We'll be looking December, January for developing our projections for the following school year as the province requests that to flow within their timelines for issuing commitment letters for funding from the ministry. And again, looking at our risks, our projected enrollments are met. If they're not met, then that results a recovery for us in the following year. So we get all our money the way we project it, but we will get an adjustment the following year. With regards to revenues, this budget assumes that we'll have total revenues of about $50.7 million. Again, the risk with that is that the funding is all based on our projected enrollments. The breakdown between that, most of our funding flows with regards to instruction and instructional supports. We have other areas and other sources, including the federal government. The federal government primarily is derived from tuition charged to on reserve learners through the federal government because they're not funded provincially. And then we have local revenues and fees. Our capital funding and allocations is basically support of either capital projects that have previously been undertaken or capital projects that are capital funding in terms of debentures. This budget actually is the first year that we have no debenture payments due. Our debentures that STAR held historically, even though fully supported, now have rolled out and have all expired and been fully paid. So, you know, in terms of debt, it's nice to see that happen. Sorry about that. Further looking at our assumptions, our certificated staff costs, 85% of the division's budget, our budget is no different, is related to staffing costs. So these are significant. So our standard cost of a teacher for next year is $102,639. That's an increase from our current year at $101. The majority of those increases, and I've talked to the board about that in the past, is shared equally with some grid increments. So we have a portion of our staff that are not at the maximum level that we allow for in our pay grids. Every year they will increase on that grid to a different pay level. But we also had a significant increase in our benefit costs related to charges for extended healthcare premiums and our policies with regard to life and accident insurance. So that was about a 7% increase on those. And so significant, it also was a significant contributor to that increase. Looking at our roll up, we had about 8.3 FTEs, fewer school-based teachers. The thing to remember is that we were kind of with the online program and with the federal fund, we were able to almost add another school into our jurisdiction. And federal funding paid for a majority of those additional teaching positions. So in comparison to where we're at in terms of staffing, next year we'll have about 8.3 fewer teachers. Majority of those were federally funded to respond to the pandemic. The other ones are adjustments back and forth between schools to our enrollment levels. With regards to support staff, Again, standard cost is what we use. That is so that the determination of what staff, a new staff member that may be hired, is not impacted by what they would be paid or what it would cost for that individual. You hire the best individual possible. So standard costs also provide for equal costing between our schools for that in particular position as they place individuals in them. So for an educational assistant, our standard cost for 10 months will be $44,400 approximately. For an admin assistant, we're looking at about $51,000. Now, administrative assistants for the most part are over 12 months, but there's not a lot of hours that are assigned during the summer months. We still kind of look at them in terms of their pay. It'll be calculated over 12 months. But majority of work will be done over 10. Our custodial staff are full 12-month staff. We've seen a decrease here because of a costing that we've reevaluated. And what we had is that we had duplication with regards to vacation time. 12-month employees take time off in lieu of being paid vacation, and we were calculating their pay over 12 months and then including a vacation payout on top of that. And that's not how it works. So we've recognized that calculation error, and it's resulted in a lower overall cost for custodians. Again, the increases that we're seeing on our admin assistants and our educational assistants is primarily due to those benefit costs that we've experienced. We carry the same benefit plan for support staff as we do for teachers. The chart gives you a bit of a breakdown in terms of how many staff and FTE that we have at the various areas. On the instructional area, where the majority of our staff are, the majority are EAs. We have other additional instructional staff, and then we work into our operations or facilities staff. There's the one thin bar for transportation, and then for central office area. Looking at the individual budgets, again, we'll look at by individual blocks. And again, if there's questions from trustees, I'm working off the presentation. I'm trying to look back. So if you raise your hand, I can see then, and it's a virtual raise of the hand. Otherwise, I will continue. So if the chair would help me out, if I need to pause for a moment for a question. With regards to instruction, I split it up between what's at the school level, but we also maintain funds centrally that get redistributed based on need or used for centralized supports. So our spending for next year is $3.8 million, a slight increase of 3.6 from the current year. What we have there is we're assuming that we're going to have additional substitute costs as we implement new curriculum. So we've increased that area by $100,000. And FNMI programming, we have some unspent funds that have not been brought into revenues, and so we'll be doing those expenditures with regards to FNMI programming. And so that's grant funding that was targeted towards FNMI programming historically. We've been allowed to carry it forward because it's gone unspent. Because of the pandemic, some activities were not undertaken, not only this year, but the previous year as well. So there's additional expenditures of nearly $100,000 there in that centralized area. With regards to certificate salaries and benefits, that's where we've also allowed for those substitute costs. We undertook as a division to centralize all substitute costs. Previously, it would be the responsibility of individual school budgets, but depending on their circumstances, the proportion that the school may have to spend of their overall budget may be disproportionate to the staff that they have or to what resources they have available to them as a school. So that's where we've moved it to a centralized fund. And unfortunately, I don't think we've seen haven't seen the full year of costs because of our operations. And we've had a bit of a surplus for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So we're trying to make sure that we've got coverage there in terms of what we need to cover staff absences, as well as staff PD. Supplies and services are primarily related to our technology plan. Most of our centralized services are staffing based or allocations towards staffing at the school level. But there's a good chunk that goes towards our technology plan. When we're looking at our instruction in our schools, there's $33.6 million, or about $7,800 per student being spent at the school level on average. This expenditure plan also sees a reduction in school operating reserves of nearly $500,000 across all of our schools. We are constantly kind of reinforcing and revisiting where school unspent funds are, what their purpose is, and whether they're utilizing all the resources that they have for the students they have now. So again, I think we saw some surpluses last year and this year because of the pandemic and what schools were able to do or had planned to do, and then as a result weren't able to do them because of our circumstances. So we've asked schools again to look at those and spend those reserves. At the end of the day, this budget projects that we'd have only about $120,000 across our schools in operating reserves for future use. So it's a significant drop in their operating reserves. And again, talking about the budgets as a whole at our schools, 77% being spent on certificated staff, another 16% on uncertificated staff. So our school budgets, we target that they have at least 5% for supplies and services. So that means that at a minimum, they shouldn't be spending more than 95% of their budget. This one represents about 93% of their budget in terms of staffing, on average across all of our schools. Moving on to plant operations and maintenance. This pie is split up many ways, and in many ways not in full control of the division in terms of how money is being spent. It's a total budget of just over $9.75 million. But as you can look at the chart, 44% of that and 45 up to 45% is related to amortization or depreciation. The supported amortization is our school buildings. So any depreciation of those school buildings, because they were fully funded by the province, has a matching revenue. So it doesn't impact the operations of our facilities. The unsupported amortization goes towards items that did not have capital funding. Primarily that looks at things like the division office building, which is not supported, and there might be some furniture equipment within the facilities department. As it amortizes, it was funded by the board out of operating, so again it gets recognized as expenditures. But when we take out that amortization, that means operation maintenance is actually operating on a budget of about $4.76 million. And then when we start looking at that effective budget, how much of it is being spent on caretaking? Well, we're at 42%. Operations and maintenance is on a plan to, I would say, reduce that percentage on caretaking. That comes at a bit of a cost because we are reducing staffing positions through attrition as much as we can. We're not laying off staff. As you can see, last year we were at 46% in caretaking costs. So we're getting into much, in my experience, a much more reasonable level in terms of what we are expending on caretaking. When I first arrived here, I think we were closer to 60% on caretaking costs. But we have to do caretaking and we have to do utilities. Our utility costs are increasing. We recently reviewed our utility costs again and our estimates within our budget and found that our budgets were low for utility costs. We're seeing increases coming up again in electricity. We'll have some benefit with the carbon tax increases, but carbon taxes also affects us in terms of our natural gas prices. But we'll see some credits back on our electricity because we're part of a wind power project. But we still have those higher costs. And we don't have a lot of control in terms of the utility costs, but that means a lot of the budget for plant operations and maintenance, when we look at the other areas, there isn't a lot of discretion. So we utilize a lot of our capital funding IMR to make up for small maintenance projects within the division. Our insurance, of course, isn't as high as it was for 1920. So there is some adjustments that are still happening with regards to property, generally speaking. And so it's slowly creeping up, but it's nowhere near the level that it has been historically. I think we're still, if I'm off the top of my head, I'd say we were less than $100,000 in that high year of 1920 in terms of our property insurance. One of the things, though, in order to make, let's go back. To make this budget balance, we are transferring almost over $800,000 from the instruction block to support staffing levels, both in caretaking and other expenditures. We've tried to go through this budget and making sure that that transfer is as minimal as possible. Last year, we transferred $675,000 into this area. The majority of that difference is as a result of the reduction in grant funding for O&M. Province, when they announced the budget, the minister had indicated that they were transferring dollars from O&M to support students with needs. Internally, the jurisdiction was supporting students with needs at a higher rate than the province was actually funding us. So we've continued on with those allocations to our schools, but we've landed up having to kind of shift funding from that instructional area to O&M to support that. Trustee Lemaire, you have a question?
Yes. Sorry, it's going back to the staff, the custodian and maintenance staff. So I just wanted to clarify. So a few years back, we were at 60% of a budget there.
Yeah.
So it seems like quite a drop. Like now we're down to like 42%. I'm just wondering, is there an idea? Is there a percentage that, you know, would be where we should be at? That would be.
Well, I wouldn't say it's an ideal. It's a matter of how we utilize the staff that we have. What we've been doing over time is increasing the number of square meters. We had survey data that had us at about, on an average of about 1,500 square meters per custodial staff member. That same survey had an average for comparison of about 2,200 square meters per custodian. So we've been slowly raising the number of square meters per custodian up. As a result, that means we haven't been replacing positions. We are expecting staff to cover more area. There are some realities to that. And I think it's most difficult for custodial staff because they'll say, well, I can't do all of that space to the same level that they have historically. And we've talked to them about, we recognize that. And yes, you're not going to be doing it to the same level you have historically, but it's still quite acceptable in terms of how our schools look overall. But that's where we're getting that lower average total costs, is that we are increasing the number of square meters that each staff member is responsible for within the school.
Okay, thank you.
So that's what, I'm not saying there's a target percentage. What I'm thinking is that we're looking to try and target what's an acceptable number of square meters for each custodian to be looking after. Trustee Tugwood?
Did we not need to hire extra custodians due to the pandemic? Or was that changed because we didn't need as many because the community wasn't utilizing our gyms and so on?
We did a lot of shifting of nighttime custodial into daytime.
Okay.
So we didn't hire as many as we thought that we'd need to do to fill in. When we did hire, we were utilizing casual custodial staff that were familiar with the school to fill those positions during the daytime.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add to that, correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, but I believe we also used some of the federal money for that.
That's correct. We had assigned almost over $200,000 for additional caretaking costs So that's where we kind of supplemented where we needed to have additional positions. All right, moving on to transportation. Transportation, for the most part, is very status quo. There's been, we'll be looking at some slight increases in our contractor costs for next year, but our transportation funding has been set and what I call flattened for the 3 years that the province announced last year. So for year 2 is what we're entering in next year. We're getting the same funding that we got for this current year, which was a 5% increase from the previous year. So as our contracts for contracted services, busing services have been finalized, there are some slight increases in our costs, but for the most part, the budget overall is rather standardized. We've built in some allowance, but we haven't implemented any additional routes. There is an allowance for partial coverage of a route. If we have to put an additional route in, I might be talking to the board about how we best do that under the budget. But we are still transferring over $200,000 to support transportation in carrying out its services. And its services don't do a lot of enhancement for ineligible students where we charge a fee. Typically what we are doing is servicing rural students, and as those buses are coming through our communities, are coming into our community, we are filling those buses up with ineligibles. But it's not a full recovery in terms of the fee that we charge for ineligibles of what the per student cost is of that bus on the route. It's only a partial. So in order to support that, we're utilizing $200,000 of instructional funds to support the transportation budget. That is the same figure that we used for the current year. So there's been no change in that transfer in any amount. And as you can see, the majority of our cost goes to contracted services. Those contracted services might be with bus contractors themselves or our partners with other divisions as we have additional costs for days where they are not normally running. They may charge us for, as well as maybe specified services where they are providing a special needs transportation bus that is not governed by that cooperative busing contract. Hello, Henry.
Yeah. To date, did we see any increase since the insurance increment with our contractors? I can't remember if we did.
All of our contracts, we had one contractor renew, so there was a slight increase in their rates overall. I can't say it was substantially attributed to increases in insurance premiums to them. What we found when we pulled our contractors last year is that the majority had insurance that was outside of the ASB group. And we only have, I think, one contractor now that's with the ARMIC group of boards. And so their rates have been, I think, much more stable compared to what might have been experienced by anybody who's continuing from ASB into ARMIC in terms of those contracts. I know I had seen rates when we had introduced our contractors to Foster Park, who's our broker. And I know there were significant increases there, but I don't know if it was as high as what they experienced. So we haven't experienced a lot of rate increases because of insurance, because of the way our contractors have operated historically.
Thank you.
We have confirmed with school boards and contractors that if they are unable because of ARMIC's guidelines and limitations, that they obtain additional insurance. My understanding is ARMIC will only allow a contractor to have insurance for the routes that are operated for an ARMIC member board. If they operate a route for a non-member board, they have to seek different insurance if they won't be covered under that policy. So there's a number of different things that are happening. The industry itself, the Transportation Contractors Association, is looking at policy for all of their members, separate and apart, so that they don't have individual members having to split their fleet in terms of what insurance program they participate in. So there's lots of things being worked on with regards to insurance and bus contractors these days, if they're not a large provider and had their own insurance program to begin with. Which makes us quite lucky, and I think grateful for kind of having that ability to have our continuity in our rates and not seeing a lot of surcharges or any surcharges at this point due to insurance. Going on to governance and system administration, our budget is just over $2 million. That is an administrative cap as well. The province says that they fund us just over $2 million. We can't spend more than that $2 million. So again, when we reviewed our budget, we made sure that we were coming in under that cap. We've had to look at some of our costs and see that they are appropriately allocated between administration and other areas if necessary. One of the things that is included in this, and we talked about this at length at the Finance Committee, is provisions for reaching out to our First Nations communities. So within this budget, there is provisions for that reach out and participation with our First Nations communities and stakeholders. Again, kind of reflected to the business that we're in. The majority of our costs are related to staffing. We maybe have a higher proportion for services, contracts, and supplies with regards to this area. And amortization and financial expenses. The administration and governance block is responsible for costs related to this building, as well as any other administrative areas. That's where we get some amortization costs associated with just this block of or area. So that's the expenditures in short. Again, I said in part of our budget presentation, I want to look at our unspent funds and try and provide some context. And in February and March, I'd usually do a presentation with regard to our financial profile. And that compares us to other boards of a similar size, as well as provincial averages. And I like to bring that back to say what our historical context has been and how we compare. So overall, this budget reduces our operating reserves. And again, all of that is school-based by about $500,000. So then when we're looking at our accumulated surplus from operations, we have an average then of we will finish the year with about $236 per student. When we compare that to the 1920 year, which is the last year that we have financial statements for and the financial profile is reporting on, we were at 417. So we're dropping that significantly, almost almost half. When we look at our cohort boards for 2019-20, they were at 792. So we were below our cohort for the same year. And if it's status quo for our cohorts, we're going to be a third of what they're at. So I think in terms of being responsive and spending the money that we have on the students that we have, we are certainly attempting to do that. And I know we've talked at length about making sure that information and that picture is presented to our MLAs, to the minister, that we are doing what is expected of us from the minister and from our stakeholders.
That's excellent. Thank you, Ed, for capturing that. Yeah, it's excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. The other thing that, again, the board looks at, we've kind of held that we have operational days of around 5. So our ASO, even with the reduction, and remember, accumulated surplus from operations includes operating reserves as well as unrestricted reserves or our unrestricted surplus. That total puts us at about 5 days. So we're right on target. 1920, again, a bit of an unusual year because of the pandemic in our operations. We had about 9 days. And again, in the context of our cohort boards, for 1920, they came in at about 14.5 days. So we were significantly less than our cohorts. Again, we're about a third of what the cohorts be is what our projection is going to be for next year, everything being equal. Now we know we're going to have some surpluses arise from this year from operations. The federal money significantly assisted with some of those additional costs that we've seen. And later on, I'll talk a bit about, but it's also represented in the budget report in terms of where we see West finishing this year at. The budget includes some of those expenditures of those surplus funds. I'm going to stop the share here. Unless there's any other questions kind of on that portion, I just want to talk a bit about the budget report itself.
That was an excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other comments for Ed?
Just to say thank you, Ed. for keeping-
Trustee Tugwood, you had a comment?
I would just say thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you, Ed, for all your work.
All right. I'm just going to highlight a few things out of the budget report itself. Again, the Finance Committee went through this in great detail. And again, we found the smallest print possible to print out. So we've tried to make sure that I thought the presentation is good, and we'll try and make this as large as possible. As I indicated before, there's an opportunity to do budget highlights, plans, and assumptions. I've tried to walk you through the presentation on the information that's here. In terms of that, the one thing that I do want to highlight is that in the budget right now, we've got a contingency for about $130,000 for continuance of an online school if we need to. Now that basically pays for an administrator to head that school if we enter into operations at that point. But it also means that we will have to go back and look at our budget overall and see what the staffing needs to be if we are operating an online program, and based on that survey information and the commitment from parents wanting an online program. With regards to business and financial risks, again, highlighting that everything's based on projections, and that one of our largest costs, which is certificated staff, the collective agreement expired in August of last year, and so it's an unknown. How significant it is largely out of the realm of the board and the division, seeing as salaries in those are centrally negotiated. There might be other aspects that have cost implications, and we'll be very cognizant of that once local bargaining goes into motion.
So can I ask a question about that first
sure.
page again? Sorry.
No worries.
I just looked at my notes here. So I'm just wondering, do we need to bring to attention that 7% benefit increase, ASCBP increase? Like, is that something that we need to include in there? I mean, you have, the standard cost of teaching staff before allowances, $102,639, including benefits. But anyhow, that was a significant increase. I'm just wondering if the Finance Committee talked about that. And then the other was the cost for the Sacred Heart mod move, if we need to highlight that.
Again, it's budget highlights and plans. We can put language in that if the board wants to portray it. Because it's a known increase, it's just something that we're absorbing. And the same with our cost for the modular that was approved for Sacred Heart. The budget includes $200,000 for it, for the benefit of all trustees. I can put both those items in there if the board wishes before I do a final submission.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. It's up to the board, but the 7% ASCBP, that was across the province, right? Like that was everybody. But
yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, I don't know. It's just a large increase, and we don't want to see that every year. But we usually don't, right? It's like, what is the usual increase in that benefit plan? Like, they're trying to absorb most yearly increases for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, the information from ASCBP is that they've been pushing the premium increases from their own investment income and reserves.
Yeah.
So we've maybe seen between 2 and 3%. 7% is being an uncushioned number is a bit shocking. My thought is for the board is by highlighting it, is it something that you wish to talk about to the province repeatedly, or is it something that's part of the general budget discussion that you keep as information and saying, you know, boards have had to absorb this, and even though the envelope that the province has told us for education funding is not changing for 3 years, and this is going into year 2 of 3. So we can add it, but I'm not sure if there is a point that the board wants to make later down the line or address that the province will respond to.
Okay, that's fine. It just
Okay.
was for awareness.
Then my
Okay, thank
comment-
you. Trustee
my
Afon?
comment- Sorry, my comment again will be, it's just like the modulars, right? The province came out and said, we'll give it to you, but you have to find your way.
You have to
and-
move it.
Exactly, and do all of
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
again, those are some of the advocacies that we do know is ongoing, but the government has made it clear. The envelope is not growing, but it's going to be changes here and there in that envelope.
And certainly we saw it in our budget and our funding profile, where the profile didn't change in total, but certainly the components got shifted around.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul in the finance.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. So in the budget report, I want to highlight the one schedule. I believe it's page 4. And this is a breakdown of the expenditures, not only into those traditional blocks, but also breaking up. They've done an expansion in terms of the instruction block. And so they're asking us for our expenditures and revenues that we've assigned to pre-kindergarten program, third year kindergarten severe programming. The new area that they announced with part of the budget that we've been managing thus far. They're now, for lack of a better phrase, labeling, which is the moderate language delay, and then everything else in K-12. And so the presentation here, when we looked at it, a lot of our services are centralized. So what we've had to do is prorate our costs based on the number of students that we estimate that we'll have in each of those areas. And what we're seeing there is from that proration is all 3 of those sub areas that we're reporting on are actually in a deficit compared to provincial funding. And it's not a bad thing. It means that we are putting more resources in to support students with needs than what the province has allocated. And I think that's what we've identified early on, is that we've made it work, but we are supporting those students of needs moving forward. And then also highlighting that operations maintenance is at a significant deficit, as well as transportation. And our admin budget is balanced, but we've allocated $10,000 of our investment income to help support that. The budget reports includes 2 schedules, which details out school fees as well as other sales and services. If there's no questions on that, I'm just kind of moving on. It's additional detail. There has been some reporting changes in the schedule, so the comparables don't completely align on those 2 schedules. But this is the one I want to talk a little bit more about, which is where our surplus funds will be sort of as we move from the last audit financial statements, the conclusion of this year, and then conclusion of the following year. So on our audited financial statements, we finished 1920 with $993,000 of unrestricted surplus or undesignated reserves. Our operating reserves were at $1 million, and those operating reserves are either school-based budget surpluses, the school-based school-generated funds, as well as some small reserves we had set up for curriculum implementation. So moving through this year, we've done some adjustments. Previously, we thought we had a balanced budget. We've now increased that surplus to expect to be at $1.5 million based on some of the areas that we know we're going to have surplus funds. We know we are going to have surplus funds from the amount that we had allocated for substitute costs. We know we have surplus funds because we had set up contingencies to deal with class sizes that we didn't utilize. So those two areas we've reallocated out to the schools. We know we're going to have surplus funds in other areas because of federal money. And one of the things that we've put in this budget is to utilize $200,000 of surplus funds to support the that modular that's been approved for Sacred Heart. So that's where our unrestricted surpluses, we're expecting it to rise by at least $600,000. What we're expecting, or what we had budgeted for, was those operating reserves to drop to about 800,000. But then at the end of next year, where we're saying is that our unrestricted reserves are going to come down to about 900,000. So we're staying pretty balanced from where we finished 1920 to where we'll finish 21-22. Our operating reserves are significantly declining. Again, we're spending that $500,000 in school-based reserves. Our capital reserves, we've got very little budgeted in terms of our capital reserves, and we may need to kind of evaluate. $85,000 is a capital reserves related to the administration building. But there's $100,000 in a furniture and equipment capital budget that was set aside, and we may need to reevaluate how that money needs to be utilized moving forward. But this budget doesn't project anything. This $1.5 million, I believe, is a conservative figure. We've looked at it, we've got preliminary in the third quarter financial report of where it might land up. But it'll be fourth quarter going into financial statements where I'll be have a much solid figure, but I think this 1.5 might be still a little conservative. The province has asked for how reserves are utilized over the 3 years. Well, we don't have a lot of reserves and unspent funds that just aren't just prudent savings accounts. So there's not a lot for the next 3 years that we show as any expenditures. All of it has to deal with is the current year. This last schedule that I'll go through, it details out that $1.1 million deficit that we're submitting for our budget. And the province asked us, like, where are those expenditures coming from? And this is part of the change in the legislation where we have ministerial approval. So this is the schedule that's used to go to the minister for approval of having a deficit budget and utilizing reserves. So part of our reserves that we're utilizing, $50,000, is supporting the administration at Father Lacombe while they're undergoing construction, recognizing that they need additional time and supports to transition between going into the new school, ordering furniture, equipment, coordinating staff, additional meetings with construction, those type of things. Staffing, $150,000 just from our staffing contingency that was unspent, and we're using that to support schools for enrollment increases and requiring additional certificated staff where necessary. We have the substitute pool surplus of $150,000 that we're estimating. Those funds will, again, additional substitute costs due to curriculum-based professional development. We're utilizing the $500,000 of school-based reserves. We have $92,000 for that of unspent funds related to First Nations Métis programming. We're expecting to complete that all in 21-22. And then we have our deficit and our increased spending in operations and maintenance. And so in order to keep maintenance running as the status quo, we needed almost $250,000 more. So that's what we've identified. Part of those funds to support our operations and maintenance expenditures. So that's what's going to the minister for a request. There's some pluses and minuses there. So the net effect is $1.1 million is the request to the minister at this time. And I think that's one of the most significant item for trustees to be aware of. is what is our request to the minister, and it's just over $1 million that we're asking, but 1.2. The last 2 pages deal with student statistics and staffing statistics that were part of my presentation. Again, there's more detail there. Not to gloss over it, but the numbers are pretty fine. I'm not sure if there's any other questions with regards to the budget.
Any comments or questions? Pretty thorough. Thank you very much, Edward. And I guess that last piece about like the request to the minister, it's pretty straightforward. They're getting approved. These requests are getting approved. It's more oversight that the government is choosing to do this.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything that a board has been refused an item that's been requested.
Just trying to get an understanding of reserves and how they're being spent, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is advocacy to, move away from that at ASBA level there, definitely, because we've never had to do that before. So, okay. So any other comments or questions? And we do have a motion on the books on 4.8. If somebody's willing to make that motion.
Can make that
Trustee
motion.
Tugwood.
Okay.
That the board approve the budget for the 2021-2022 school year as presented.
Okay, excellent. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's carried unanimously. So you probably need me to drop in to sign it off, correct? Or, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, will do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we are at a little bit past lunch. So we could take a break now till 1 o'clock and then come back to 4.9. Okay, we'll go into recess. Everybody have a good break. See you in a bit.
Have a good lunch, everyone.